We are going to be starting chapter 10 where we are going to be graphing quadratic functions, or in other letters and numbers, y equals ax squared plus c. We define a quadratic function as a nonlinear, or meaning not a line, function that can be written in the standard form of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, which is the same thing that we were factoring in chapter 9. So a parabola is a U-shaped graph. We have a U-shaped graph right there. That is a parabola. Then our next vocab word is a axis of symmetry. An axis of symmetry is a line that divides the parabola into two symmetric parts. And we're going to use this blue line as our axis of symmetry. Notice that each point on the line, on the red line, is the same distance to the blue line as its other part on the other side of the blue line. So each dot on the red line, so each blue dot that I'm drawing, is equal distance from the middle or the blue line. Next vocab word is the vertex. The vertex is the lowest or highest point on the parabola. Here we have a vertex at, I'm going to put it in green, 0, 0. And there is our vertex. Our vertex is at 0, 0. And lastly, we have a parent function. And the definition of a parent function is the basic quadratic function y equals x squared, which we're going to graph next. Here, the first thing that we're going to do is graph y equals x squared. Well, the first thing that we have to do is make a table, and our table is already up here. Next thing we have to do is pick our favorite points, and I'm going to start off by picking points for my x. All right, I'm going to start with 0. So now after 0, I'm going to pick 2 points below 0, so -1 and -2, and 2 points above 0, 1 and 2. Now I'm going to put this -2 in for that x. So I'm going to go -2 squared. And remember that -2 squared, it's -2 times -2. -2 times -2 is 4. Next, I'm going to put -1 in for x. Square it. -1 times -1 is 1. So I'm going to put 1 in for my y. Then we have 0 squared. 0 squared is 0. And then we have 1 squared. And 1 squared is just 1. And finally, we have 2 squared, which is 2 times 2, which gives us 4. Notice anything interesting happening here with our numbers? Well, let's try to graph them, see what we come up with. So, first one I'm going to start off with is this guy right here. See if I can draw nice and neat. -2, 4. I'm going to plot that as a coordinate point. So I'm going to go over -2, up 1, 2, 3, 4, and put a point. Then I'm going to graph -1, 1. So I go over -1, up 1. Ooh, put a point. Then I have 0, 0, put a point. Then I have +1, up 1. And then I have +2 from x, up 4. And now I have 5 dots. Notice what kind of shape I have. I should have a U. Now the fun part is to connect the dots something like this. And we come up with a graph that should look like a U. This is a U graph, not to be confused with a V. It is a U graph because of that square. Next problem that we have is y equals ax squared plus 3. Notice what we're changing now. Here we're adding a 3. This blue line is our parent graph, or somewhat close to a parent graph, by this guy up here. So I'm still going to pick my favorite points. I'm going to start with 0, then I'm going to put in -1 and -2, and then 2 points above 0, which is 1 and 2. And now I'm going to put that -2 in for that x and see what I come up with. So I get -2. I'm going to square that, plus 3. So -2 squared is 4, plus 3 is 7. Then I'm going to square negative 1 and still add 3 to it. So it's negative 1 squared, which is positive 1, plus 3 is 4. Then we have 0 squared plus 3. 0 plus 3 is just 3. Moving on to 1 squared plus 3 is 4. And finally, 2 squared plus 3 is 7. So I'm going to put all these guys in for my y. So 7, 4, 3, 4, and 7. Now let's see if we can graph this table. So my coordinate point, negative 2, 7. I'm going to go over negative 2 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and try to put a point right on that coordinate. Then I'm going to go over negative 1 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, put a point, 0, 0. Then I'm going to go to positive 1 on the x, up 4, and then over 2 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, put a point. Now, I have 5 dots. I have something that might resemble a U, so let's go ahead and connect the dots as pretty as we can. And we have something that looks like this. Yours is going to look a little bit better than mine. I never passed art class. Next, we are graphing y equals 3x squared. Notice the difference. Now we have no c term, but we have a term. An a term is whatever is in front of the x. So again, we're going to start off with our 5 favorite coordinates for our x, and it's going to be negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. So I have 3 times negative 2 squared. Now remember, we're going to start with negative 2 squared. That's 4. 3 times 4 is 12, a positive 12. Next we have 3 times negative 1 squared. We have negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 1 times 3, which is 3. Next we have, not 0. I'm going to get rid of that really quickly. We still have 3 times 0 squared, which is 0. And then moving on, we have 3 times 1 squared. That's going to give us 3. And 3 times 2 squared, that's going to give us 12. Notice any pattern with our numbers. So I'm going to plug them into our table. And once again, graph these coordinates. So negative 2, 12. I'm going to go over negative 2 on the x and up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And put a point right there. Then negative 1 up 3. Then 0, 0. Then 1, 3. And then 2 up 12. And again, we have some dots. Hopefully they're in a U graph and I missed my dot. Do your best to connect the dots. Again, I can barely draw straight lines. And there's our graph. Again, it should be a U up at the bottom. Notice what our 3 did to the graph. All right, the blue line is the parent function, and our red line is that graph. Notice what the 3 did to our graph. It made it a little bit skinnier. Now, again, we are going to move on to y equals 1/2 x squared. I want to point out this 1/2 x squared. When we ever have something with a fraction, I'm going to use almost the same common multiple that's on the bottom of this fraction. So the same common multiple. So instead of using negative 2, negative 1, 0, I'm going to use negative 4, negative 2, 0, 2, and 4. Now if you don't notice that right away, that's okay. If you use the negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2, you're still going to come up with the same sort of graph. You're just going to have maybe decimal points right here, making it a little bit awkward to graph. But let's try our new numbers right here. So again, I'm putting this negative 4 right into that x. So I have 1/2 times negative 4 squared. Negative 4 squared is a positive 16. 1/2 of 16 is 8. Ooh, that's an ugly 8. Then I have 1/2 times negative 2 squared. Negative 2 squared is 4. 1/2 of 4 is 2. Then I have 1/2 times 0. 1/2 times 0 is 0. Then I have 1/2 times 2 squared. Then 2 squared is 4. 1/2 of 4 is 2. And then finally 1/2 times 4 squared, which is 16. 4 squared is 16. 1/2 of 16 is 8. So I'm going to try to draw my numbers a little bit nicer in my table. Now, we are going to plot these coordinates. So negative 4, 8. So go over negative 4 up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Plot your point. Then negative 2 over 2 up 2. Then we go 0, 0. Then we have 2 up 2. Then we have positive 4 up 8. Again, we should have a U shape. And again, I'm going to try my best to connect the dots to give us a U shape. And I'm sure all of you are much better artists than I am. But again, we get a U shaped. Notice what this 1/2 does to our red graph. Look at the red graph compared to our parent function, our blue graph. It is a little bit wider than the blue graph. One last final one, and we're going to move through it fairly quickly here. We have negative 1/4 x squared. Now, let's pay attention to this negative 1/4. I'm going to use multiples of 2, the same kind we did last time, and we will see what happens. So I'm going to use a negative 4, a negative 2, 0, positive 2, and 4, plugging these guys in for x. So I'm going to have negative 1/4 times negative 4 squared. Negative 4 squared is 16. Negative 1/4 of 16 is a negative 4. Then I have negative 1/4 still. Negative 2 squared. Negative 2 squared is a positive 4. Negative 1/4 of a positive 4 is negative 1. Then I have, again, I keep thinking it's 1/2. So then I have negative 1/4 of 0 squared, which is 0. I have negative 1/4 of 2 squared. Again, it's going to be 4. 1/4 of 4 is negative 1. And finally, I have negative 1/4 times 4 squared, and that's going to give me negative 4. I'm going to put my points in my table, and then I'm going to plot my point. So I have negative 4 over 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I have to go down 1, 2, 3, 4. Put a point. Then we put a point at negative 2, negative 1, and we try to draw a point there. And then we go 0, 0, then positive 2, down 1, and then a positive 4, down 4. Now, look again what our fraction did as I try to attempt, to connect the dots. And you have a U. You will probably have a much better looking U than I do for my graph, but our graph should look something like this. Notice, what do you think that negative did to our graph? And looking at the 1/4, what did the 1/4 do to our graph? And finally, I'm going to attempt to, now a vertical stretch. We have a couple words for a vertical stretch and a vertical shrink. A vertical stretch is something that makes our graph really tall and really lengthy, nice, tall and skinny. And then a vertical shrink is where it gets small and it's really wide. Vertical stretch, vertical shrink. Stretch, shrink, stretch, shrink. Then we have a reflection, and a reflection is something that we're going to take this blue line and we'll flip it up and down, and then it's going to open towards the down. And what did that previously to make a reflection? And then finally a translation, where it's just a green graph where it goes either up and down, side to side. And that does it for our lesson for 10.1.